Hey everyone, it's Jenny here with jccards.com. Today I've got for you a really super cute Christmas card created using Flora Fauna stamps. It was inspired by a challenge that's currently running till the end of the week by Inspired by All the Little Things. So I'm going to show you how I created this, and if you want to go over and check their website, I'll leave a link down in the doobly-doo. So first off, I'm starting with Spellbinder's Nested Stars dies, and I've die cut a window in a piece of Inkadinkado stamping masking paper. I actually trimmed the paper down to the size of an A2 size card so that when I used the die to cut the hole, I was going to get it exactly in the place that I wanted it. And I've laid it over a piece of Bristol Smooth because I'm going to be doing some ink blending, and it's far easier to do ink blending on Bristol than it is on Neenah Solar White. And I'm using my Nuvo brush to try and get more of a softer feel. I'm using Distress ink in black soot, and that stuff can go on really super dark. My pad seems extra juicy, or it might just be the typical of that colour. And I'm gently brushing over. I actually cut out quite a lot of the ink blending I did here with the brush. I went over several times, going slightly lighter towards the bottom of the star, and then just to make it a little bit darker towards the top, I used my Distress mini ink blending tool and just darkened it up towards the top for a sort of black ombre look. I'm now using Sukaneko Shimmer Spritz spray in Frost. And that looks really cool against the black ink. It lifts it a little bit like when you spritz water on it, and then I'm drying it. Now, when I'm drying it with my heat tool, that does lift up the mask, but it's not a problem. I am going to be doing some heat embossing in a minute, and so I will need to reapply the mask, but it's still sticky and it will still work. So again, as I said on other videos, you need to be extra certain that that Distress ink is dry before you do any heat embossing over the top. So dry, dry, dry again with your heat tool, and always use a powder tool. I found that the little powder bag is actually better than the EK Success powder tool for this. So I've just reapplied the mask over the top, and I'm now using the Flora and Fauna stamp set. I'll include a link to it in the information below the video. And I've selected this little cluster of stars, and I'm just stamping it in Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink which you use for heat embossing. And I can't really see where I'm stamping, so kind of best guess. It's not a problem if the stars overlap. It doesn't need to be perfect, and I'm just stamping them all over, and in some instances I'm going over the edge of the mask, which is why I replaced it. And now I'm going to sprinkle on some Hero Art's white embossing powder, and luckily it doesn't stick where I don't want it to because I use the powder tool. And what I'm going to do is I'll check to see that I got the right coverage in terms of where the stars are, and I do notice that there are a few areas where I didn't actually stamp any stars. It's not a problem. I just go back in with the stamp and reapply. I didn't put the mask back on, so I have to be a little bit careful not to go over the edge of the star. And when you're doing this sort of thing, stamping a background with a smaller stamp, it helps to try and keep the pattern more random if you rotate the stamp so it doesn't look like an even cluster every time you stamp the image. So I'm just reapplying more embossing powder, and there's still one little area that I want some stars in. And then I'm going to heat emboss it with my heat tool. I really love this stamp set. I love the Flora and Fauna stamps. They're very hand drawn. I love all the range. I've got a few of them now, so I'm going to be using them quite a lot in future cards. So I'm using another stamp from the set. This is a little cluster of hand drawn trees. It looks like part of a forest. There's 5 trees on there, and what I'm going to do is stamp them again in Versamark, but I'm going to do a strip of the trees right across the card. So I'm drawing a very faint pencil line using my T-ruler just to make sure that I can get the stamps lined up. Given the sketchy feel of the stamps, it's not much of a problem if they're not perfectly lined up. but given that this was quite a clean and simple card, I wanted to try and get them as lined up as I possibly could. And then I'm using Ranger's Superfine Gold Embossing Powder. And as I'm stamping them, because I don't want these trees to overlap, I'm applying the powder after every stamp, so I can make sure that they don't overlap and I can see where I'm stamping. Actually, overlaying two different types of embossing powder, I don't do it that often, but when I do, I always wish that I did it more. It is a really cool look, and sometimes what you'll find is the heat embossing underneath the layer on the top kind of shows through somewhat, the indentation, so you can actually see the texture of the snow behind the trees, which is pretty cool. So I've pulled one of the polar bears from the stamp set. There's 3 of them. And I wanted to use the little guy that looks like he's looking up at the stars. So I've stamped him in some Copic friendly ink by Simon Says Stamp. That's the Intense Black. And then I'm using my Copics to shade him. So he is a polar bear, but if you don't colour in white, you can't really colour in white. Usually I use a bit of grey to shade the bear. So I'm using C3, I think, then I blend it out with C1, and I'm also using the blender, which is the 0, and that basically pushes colour away and helps to kind of blend out into a smoother gradient. I'm also using, so I've got the marker pen lids up there, but I'm also using R20 for his cheeks, his nose, and a little bit of the, I guess they're speckles on his back. And then I'm going to fussy cut him out. Actual fussy cutting this time, not using my scan and cut. I couldn't be bothered just for this little image. So I sat back and did a bit of fussy cutting, and I did manage to not cut off any of his feet, so that was good. And there he is. So I'm going to outline with my Memento black marker. Just hides any of the kind of bad cutting or the little bits that sometimes stick out. If you go round it in a black marker, it makes it look a little bit more finished. And then I'm going to pop him up on foam tape at the front of the card. I'm adhering the card to an A2 size card base, which is made from Neenah Solar White, 110 pounds, so it's a thick cardstock. It's good for card bases. And that's actually 11 inches by 4¼ inches, scored at 5½ inches. And then for the sentiment, I've got a scrap of grey cardstock from my scrap pile, and I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment from the set using the Ranger Superfine Gold Embossing Powder. And then I'm just going to trim out the sentiment using my scissors. And basically all that's left to do is pop it up onto a strip of foam tape, and that completes the card. Super clean and simple, really sparkly in real life. That gold against the black distress ink looks fab, even if I do say so myself. Hope you guys enjoyed the card. I do hope to have more videos up in the very near future, so I really appreciate if you give this a thumbs up, leave me a comment, ask me any questions that you might have. I've got all the supplies listed in the description below and over on my blog. And please click the subscribe button to get notified of any new videos I'm going to be putting up in the near future. Thanks very much. Bye.